Thank you, Celeste.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky.
Let it
Resound
resound.
as the rolling sea.
I like this part right here. Come on.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on
March on.
till victory is won.
Now we add a little something to it. Just to encourage you. We're gonna take it to church right now. Let's go.
We'll keep marching right until the victory is won.
To all my brothers out there.
Hold your head up, brother, till the victory is won.
To all my sisters in the struggle.
Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won.
Till that day.
Till that day comes.
Hey.
Let us march on
To victory.
till victory is won. Is won.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful earth plane that we are so fortunate to wake up this morning and have a breath of life, a breath that assures us that we are able to claim all that is available to us in this beautiful, beautiful earth. So I welcome you to this very important endeavor that we have been working on for quite some time and look forward to an exciting opportunity for dialogue. This is not meant to be a experience where we come to lots of answers. This is an opportunity for us to learn, for us to grow, for us to evolve in understanding. Excuse me, I'm an allergy sufferer as well. But this is, as I said, this is an opportunity for us to expand, to learn, to hopefully grow in the sense that are there things that we need to further understand to enhance our ability as spiritual practitioners? And most importantly, are there things that we need to understand to be better or more effective spiritual practitioners, to the extent to which we are able to connect and resonate with those in spirit? So let us join together, creating a sacred space via this new and improved way for us to communicate. Let us walk together. Let us resonate together. Let us relate to one another without the usual shall I say respectfully, defensiveness or competitiveness or ouchesness that we often come to these situations together. There has been created, I believe, by at least my guides and spiritual practitioners in spirit, where we can all come to this sacred table on an equal basis, on a basis of understanding that ultimately we are members of a wondrous human community that has been created with support and love, and most of all, grace. So let us join together this morning, this afternoon and evening, wherever you are on the earth plane, in this endeavor, the endeavor to build bridges, the endeavor to build and expand our understanding of ways in which our ability to be a vehicle for this wondrous spirit, this wonderful God that created this day for us, that are there ways in which we can enhance, we can improve our ability. And as the spiritualists say, eternal progress is open to every human soul. And ladies, gentlemen, all that are here today, that progress, that enhancement is open to us this day and every day. So if Sister Latifu is in the audience, excuse me, let us briefly have an opening prayer. Sister Latifu, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I know you are. I know you are. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good morning to all. And as we bow our heads and calm our bodies, first we want to send out healing thoughts and healing energy, not only to Sister Lorna as she deals with the environment, but to all of us as we deal with the environment. Let us open our hearts and our minds and give thanks, first of all, for this wonderful, wonderful song that we just heard, which many might not know is the Negro National Anthem, that helps us remember the strength of the past, the support for the present, and the hope and energy of the future for all of us. May we open our minds and hearts and our hands to listen deeply this morning and see what resonates within us, to see how we can use this information to be better people and to help the world to heal itself. We give thanks to those who are in the gallery and those who are on the panel, and we know that the divine source guides our thoughts, our words, our hearts, to enable us as we leave to put what we've heard and felt into action, to allow us to be God's messengers and ambassadors of love. May it be so.
And so it is. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Latifu. And thank you for always being there. I don't have to ask.
You're welcome.
You're there. So, dear friends, we have a wonderful opportunity today with an illustrious panel that I will briefly introduce in just a few minutes. But we wanted to find a way, a vehicle by which we could begin to understand this whole idea of anti-racism and the extent to which this this concept, which has enormous relevancy for here in the United States and all over Europe and all over our world, because we do know the issue of oppression, the issue of stigma, the issue of the various isms is something that is relevant to all of our world. It is been theorized and hypothesized by great academicians and scientists and so forth. But we, the common people, and I include myself in that group, we understand that it's a lived experience. And are there ways in which we begin to understand how we can manage, how we can cope, how we can understand? But most importantly, is there an opportunity for us to re-examine and self-reflect and begin to initiate a process of self-knowledge within ourselves so that we are not victimized, for lack of a better term, by the various ways, the various formal and informal, and some of the very quiet ways many of these isms impact us here in our world. And so to that extent, we thought we would have an opportunity to come together to begin to understand ways in which we can circumvent, way in which we can turn inward, because we do know that we take great time to study the techniques of mediumship, the various avenues of healing, whether it's Reiki or energy healing, or there's so many healing entities, or whether we have our psychic studies and we look at oracle cards and we look at soul readings and we try to get to the best tutors. I won't name their name because this is our time. All right. So we know some of the great tutors we've gone to, but we don't exercise some of that same enthusiasm and motivation and looking at the extent to which the personal transformation process is absolutely necessary in this journey that we're on to become effective, spiritually focused spiritual practitioners. So, dear friends, this is an opportunity for us to dialogue about racism and ways in which, as spiritual practitioners, we have been impacted by it. And are there things, are there avenues, are there situations in which we can understand the importance of recognizing this impact within our soul, within our soul's journey, and within the relatedness of our higher selves? Because we want to understand that. We want to understand it in a compassionate way, not in a judgmental or self-flagellating way. We want to understand it so that we can deal with it. So who do we have today on our wonderful panel? And I'm not at all sharing in any order because in this situation, especially in our mediums of African ancestry, and by the way, if this is your first time with us, I hope it won't be the last. We are a diverse learning community, as it is with our panel, and we are searching, we are examining, we are self-reflecting, and we're looking for all of the tools, the ideas and the concepts that are available to us to better understand ways in which we can be more effective and promising spiritual practitioners. So again, not in order of uh, importance, we first have Ivory Bennett. Ivory, will you give a wave to everyone? Ivory is a 30-year-old published millennial working in Dallas, Texas as a wonderful, wonderful educator. She is an inspiration. She was a former foster care youth. Yes, foster care with 17 years of lived experience. She also has type 1 diabetes, which is also known as juvenile diabetes. But this is not these factors in her life, these things that had a potential stigmatizing influence did not hold her back. She has a strong sense of healing potential and power in art, especially writing. She's a writer, and she credits art, a love of learning, and a passion for literacy for her success. She's got a bachelor's of art with a dual degree from University of Pittsburgh in Africana Studies and English Literature with a minor in theater arts. She has a master's in educational administration, and she's currently an aspiring doctoral student. Currently, she teaches as a dual accredited English teacher and cheer coach at Title I Collegiate Academy. Although she is new to mediumship, she recognizes her ability to communicate with spirit in terms of clear cognizance, clear audience, and clear sentience. You're on the right road, Ivory. She's a sensitive person and comes from a lineage of spiritually gifted people. She intends to develop her gifts in mediumship and hopes to help people and to heal people, offer healing to people, and also to to their families. She has a strong commitment to education and, of course, to spiritual work. She loves to travel, try new vegan dishes. I'd like to try some too, Ivory, and also tend to her plant babies. She awaits the arrival of her fiance from Nigeria and their new Lasso Apso puppy, who is named Bella. Please unmute yourself and welcome Ivory. She is a wonderful, wonderful person.
Welcome, Ivory.
Hey, welcome, Ivory.
Hi,
Welcome.
Thank
welcome.
you, I should say. Inspiring.
Welcome.
Welcome, Ivory.
Lovely. Thank you all. Now, she is also with her wonderful friend and roommate, Lauren. Lauren, if you are on here, please give a wave. Lauren is also in Dallas, Texas, and I have adopted them both. Uh, they never said no, so I guess it's okay as my godchildren. So here's another wonderful, wonderful person. And I don't even know, I don't remember how I met her. And it's just wonderful how people just come into your life because you know that's spirit in action. And that's Celeste Elliott. Celeste, will you give a wave so people will know that you are here and you are on our illustrious panel? She is born and raised in Northeast Ohio. Ohio is a very interesting state, I tell you. It's either purely red or purely blue. And I've met some very interesting people from Antioch. So Ohio, very interesting. And absolutely, Celeste is also very interesting. She grew up, according to her bio, in metaphysical and spiritual community. She studied mediumship in traditional development circles and workshops. And after graduate school, she attended and was ordained through the Fellowship of the Spirit School in Cassadaga, New York. Very interesting things that went on in that area, Celeste. Very spiritual, strong spiritual vibration there. She is a year-round resident of the Lilydale area in upstate New York and is a registered medium on the grounds. Cheers for you for going through their assessment process, which is not so easy. In the off season, she travels to serve churches, teach, and demonstrate mediumship. So again, please unmute yourself and welcome Celeste Elliott.
Thank you, Celeste. Welcome. Welcome, Celeste.
Welcome, Celeste.
I grew up in
Welcome.
Ohio.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And next, here's another member of our panel and also a member of our wonderful spiritual community, learning community, Mediums of African Ancestry, and that is Roz Reynolds. Roz, so glad to have you. Roz is a person that states she's been able to communicate with the spirit world even before she was old enough to understand what a medium was or had the vocabulary to adequately describe the intuitive or psychic ability she experiences currently. She believes that the innocence of childhood allows one to be open to the gift of deeper awareness. So true, Roz. Not wanting to offend those in her life, she kept her abilities to herself, only acknowledging them to a few family members and close friends. She kind of was in the closet, right, Roz? But nonetheless, we often cannot deny our authentic self or the extent to which our higher self wants to have the opportunity to express itself. So, although she worked for 20 years in corporate America and also raised two sons working in executive and administrative positions to key staff in corporate America. But no matter how wonderful it was to feel this, to have these wondrous opportunity to lead in the corporate world, her spirit, her soul's expression begged to be manifested. And now she lives in San Diego with her husband and her sons, and she has begun her formal development work in mediumship and intuitive work. And she has studied with a number of wonderful mediums and in the Arthur Finley College, and also with a number on the American scene. And you all know who you are, and thank you for your work. She has been involved in a number of workshops and development circles and has gained uh, wonderful relationships with other mediums and other people that are working spiritually. So without further ado, please welcome Roz Reynolds. Open your mics and give Roz, you know, we're all
Welcome,
volunteers,
Roz.
a
Welcome,
little
Roz.
nervous,
Welcome, Roz.
and we
Thank
need
you.
a lot of support. And keep in mind, we're co-creating these events. These are we're not just sitting here with lots of different answers to all the problems. We are co-creating. We are working together energetically so that hopefully we can all come to some understanding. And last but not least, please welcome Caitlin. Caitlin is another situation, my sister friend, may I call you that, Caitlin, who came into my life so synchronistically, I still don't know exactly what happened. I know I did a couple of different posts, which you all know that I have the tendency to speak my mind. And I, with God's help, I will continue to do that until I'm called home. And despite the naysayers that say some awful things to me, I will, as Maya Angelou has said, still I rise. Still I rise. So all of a sudden, Caitlin was there. She just appeared and she wrote something to me, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this woman this woman wants to be involved. This woman wants to pursue discussion. This woman wants to see what we could do to work together." And for since then, There's been a wonderful marriage, for lack of a better term, a wonderful relationship between her and myself, and also Sister Latifa. We're going to bring you in there, Sister Latifa. Uh, Caitlin is a wonderful spiritual practitioner, both in mediumship and healing and psychic work. In fact, one day I had a problem and I called her up and asked her to give me a reading on it. Her background and experience uh, in academia is noteworthy. I believe I'm going by my memory, and Caitlin, if I'm making a mistake, please forgive me. But her background and experience in academia had a lot of focus on the isms that plague our society. I believe she did work in women's studies and Africana studies, and you name it. She has been a learner that is seeking ways in which to understand many of these things in our world. And since joining and helping us to promote the mediums of African ancestry, she has worked with both Latifu and myself to develop a number of workshops focusing on the ways in which the various isms that are in our society have served to dim the light of spiritual practitioners. Because again, if we don't begin to understand how we are affected and how we are effecting these various isms, we are doomed. You know, often you hear, uh, if you keep on doing the same thing, expecting different results, that is a symptom of a big problem with the way you think and the way you experience information. So Caitlin is not only a wonderful spiritual practitioner, she has wonderful, wonderful abilities in technology. And you often have to find people that speak to the areas in your life where you have deficits. And I definitely recognize that. She is often just my right hand because I know I can contact her and I can say, please help with this or please help with that. And she is there. She is a willing worker. She is a helpful worker. She's a loving worker. And she comes with a breadth of understanding and experience in this subject area. So please welcome, open your mics, give Caitlin a warm, warm welcome.
Hi,
Welcome,
Caitlin.
Caitlin.
Welcome,
Caitlin.
Caitlin.
Thank you for
Welcome.
being here.
Welcome, Caitlin.
All right. Whoever has that bass voice, you sound like the guy that was in the Temptation. Are you involved at all with the reincarnation of the Temptation? Or maybe I'm showing my age, and you all don't know who the Temptations were, but they were a great group. So I love your voice, sir, and thank you for
Thank you.
coming.
I'm a professional hypnotist, and that voice serves me very well.
Well, don't do any of that work right now because I'll tell you, I will fall into trance because I'm exhausted. Thank you for
Okay,
coming, sir. Thank you.
you're welcome.
So, as I said, we want to begin to understand what does it mean to be an anti-racist spiritual practitioner, and the ways in which racism may apply to your sense of spirituality, your spiritual practice, your spiritual work, and why understanding how you are being affected and also effecting is vital for your self development. So, some of the, shall we say, understanding that we need to have in coming to this table that I said, this imaginary table, to further our understanding of this work requires that we have some mutual definitions of certain things before we begin our discussion. So, the first thing is, I think we all have to agree that racism is one of the many isms that plague not only our society here in the United States, but throughout the world. Um, when I was teaching recently, I talked a lot about the experience of the Rohingyas in Myanmar. Now, you may say, Lorna, we have so many problems here. Why are you thinking about that group? I thought about that group because it explained very succinctly the way in which the whole objectification process of people occur in society, and how there can be built a mythology around the identity of these people, and how that identity goes from being a mythology to fact, and from mythology to fact to policy. And policy, we know, have power. And the policies um, affecting the Rohingya group, it's an ethnic group in Myanmar, have led to their genocide. So sometimes you have to step outside of your ethnic or racial group to begin to understand the extent to which other racial groups, other ethnic groups are going through a similar situation as yourselves, as a way to increase your learning. So we know racism has a lot to do with prejudice and bias, but we have to understand that both prejudice and bias is something that we all may experience. Now, just listen to me before you jump to conclusions. Now, Ivory is a vegan. She has a prejudice, or she has a bias where she probably does not eat meat products. Me, on the other hand, I like meat products. I don't eat as much of them as I used to, but I like meat products. But when you move both prejudice and bias to racial issues, then we begin to see the face of isms that plague our society. Now, what we need to understand in terms of racism is that both bias and prejudice begin to have a impact on our society, because the bias and the prejudice begin to have power infused in them. They have power, whether it's informal or formalized. In, just to give you an example, in the case of Emmett Till, though it was illegal to murder someone in Mississippi, somehow, some way, he was murdered. And he was murdered because he was a Black youngster, and the informal aspects of racism in Money, Mississippi at that time allowed him to be killed, and also for the men that killed him and tortured him and maimed him to be set free. So we have to understand the expansiveness, the multidimensionality, the huge cascading effect that racism has, which perhaps starts with individual bias and prejudice, and then has a life of its own, both formally and informally, in all of the aspects of our nation. And you can probably name any institution within our nation that is not free from racism. In another time, I'll be happy to uh, get some questions about the education, housing, criminal justice system. Of course, we're all presently so impacted by the police violence and the awful things that are happening day to day with people of color. And so racism is very important for us to understand. Now, we are basing a lot of our discussion today with Professor Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. He is a wonderful academician and a scholar, and he uses the definition of racism as a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. It's a wonderful definition. I probably would add again the power element in racism. It's very important for us to not understand the power element, whether it's informal or formalized. And in addition, I would add that the racial inequities impact every aspect of the society, every aspect. There is no place where racism does not show its ugly face. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm talked too much probably, but for our panelists, and you may answer in any way you like. Don't be shy. Take a deep breath. Spirit is with us. How would you define racism in our spiritual practices? And what are some of the examples of racism in our spiritual community and in our spiritual work? Just unmute yourself, and whoever would like to go first, go ahead.
I can go.
Talk.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
So for me, obviously if you're going to be a racist spiritual practitioner, that takes many forms. But if you are holding overtly racist ideas, beliefs, and biases, that's the easiest to see and understand. But it's really the hidden and subconscious and unconscious biases that are really what need to be explored and what we often miss when we're talking about whether we have racism or not. And I feel like these manifest in a bunch of ways in our work, especially in our spiritual work and mediumship. Specifically, we have presenting stereotypes as spirit evidence, using problematic or coded language, assuming that sitters of color only have spirit people of color, or assuming the opposite, that if a spirit person of color is coming through, that it has to be for a sitter of color. Assuming that practitioners of color have the same experiences as white practitioners, which of course we all have different experiences based on our race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality. Spiritual bypassing, promoting color blindness, cultural insensitivity. I think there's a lot of different ways that this manifests in our work.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that?
I think I'd also have to say that it's important to recognize when you're working with spirits who themselves may have been racist in their living lives, and in spirit that can continue, and how that can impact a reading or how they could block other people's readings or spirits from coming through. And also, again, that acknowledgement, like Caitlin mentioned, about what are your own internal biases, what are your own experiences, what are your own traumas that you're bringing to the work that you do as a medium and as a spiritualist. And so, yeah.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on the history of mediumship or the some of the fundamental parts of our?
Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to speak to. So thank you for that perfect lead-in. I believe that, and not just in the spiritualist tradition, but there are a lot of traditions where you saw institutionalized racism come into play, particularly as a reflection of the greater culture of the times, and how we're still standing on that legacy because we haven't taken the time to address it and deconstruct it. So even to this day, you see a split and a segregation within churches, within the spiritualist community. and people not feeling welcome because of these legacies. And so I think in a lot of ways led to a real lack of understanding and representation.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I might add, because you know I'm always adding stuff here, so forgive me. Unless, Roz, I don't want to leave you out. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I feel that we have to acknowledge that racism, our country is built on the foundation of our country is racist. It from the very fabric, from the very beginning, it's built on racism. Everything that we do, the Declaration of Independence, 1779, 1776. Everything that happened after that was built on that foundation. And it was written in our forefathers, their ideas were so that one group would benefit and everyone else would be marginalized. And everything built on top of that is on top of a racist foundation, and it goes that far back. So everything that we do in this country since that time has been built under the umbrella of racism. And we're still fighting that fight. It's still there. And it's like an invisible gas. There's nothing, there's nowhere that it doesn't touch. So it touches our schools, it touches our homes, it touches the workplace. And of course it touches the spiritual community, which is one of the most segregated times of the week, is when people are practicing their different spiritualisms. And being silent on it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's there. We are all operating under, we all are operating under racism, all of us. Black, white, brown, everybody. We're all operating under it. And it's almost like it's normalized that these people fight against it, and these people ignore it, but it's still there and it's affecting all of us. So I just think that we have to first acknowledge that we are all operating under the system of racism since the very beginning. Yeah, that's
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we want to, I think, also consider, and I see my dear sister Siobhan here, and I'm so happy she's here because she has done a lot of work in beginning to understand the extent to which the history both of spiritualism and mediumship is a narrative indicative of bias. It's a narrative indicative of summarily omitting the extent to which both people of African descent and also people of color have been dismissed in understanding the extent to which their contributions, both in spiritualism and also in mediumship and trance, and all of the spiritual practices that we hold dear to our hearts. You know, when we think about the spiritualist pioneers, we all of the Fox sisters, the Emma Harding Bridget, Richard Owens, all of those people come to mind. But we fail summarily to include people like Harriet Wilson, William Cooper Nels, and even on a more of a contemporary scene, Tekla Khan and Mother Leafy Washington. And we would be total failures if we didn't keep in mind, in and about the 1920s, although the spiritualists were among the free thinkers and among the people that really focused on ways in which our entire nation could be a better nation by having equal rights for women and equal rights for people of color. There was integration in the spirit, well, some form of integration in the spiritualist churches, but in the 1920s, as the horrific Jim Crow era came into the United States, so did the segregation of white spiritualists from Black spiritualists. And this is why we have, of course, many of the Black spiritualist movement here in the United States and some of the churches that continue to exist. So again, going back to Professor Kendi's points, he indicates that if we don't understand the deleterious effects and expansive effects of racism, that it's not enough for us to say that we don't believe in racism or we do not ascribe to racism. What Professor Kendi indicates is that the opposite of racist is not racist. The true opposite of racist is anti-racist. He says that both the racist and the anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. What does it mean to constantly reaffirm your identity as an anti-racist? Is there any benefit to the fact that you can just decide you are not racist or anti-racist and be done with it? So to our panelists, what do you understand is being anti-racist? Do you feel it's important? Do you feel it is an essential aspect of your self-development work as a spiritual practitioner? You may respond as you wish and don't be shy.
I think that it's important as a Black person. I only speak from a Black perspective because that's what I am and who I am. But for other people of color, it might apply as well. But I think you have to address your own internalized racism before you can begin to understand fully how racism exists outside of yourself, right? And how it exists in the institutions that you have to navigate and in the societies in which you have to live. And so that can be a lot of hard work. It's not something that, oh, let me just go to a 2-hour workshop and I'm magically decolonized. So it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a healing journey. You're going to need a lot of people who you can depend on and lean upon. But addressing internalized racism is the first step, I would say, for Black and Brown people. I think the other step that you have to consider is that Black and Brown people, and this might not sound politically correct, but it is true, you know, as a Black person, as a Brown person, you can't be racist. You can be prejudiced, you can have a lot of biases, but you will never benefit from racism. And so I think that's a conversation that has to be had more often. You can be as mean and as prejudiced and as unkind as you'd like, but institutionally, Black and Brown people do not benefit from racism. So racism is something that is held by whiteness. And I can't speak on that because I'm not white, but that's what they hold. And what they do with that is what they do with that. But as Black and Brown people, you have to decolonize yourself and you have to address your own internalized stereotypes and archetypes and see how that operates life consciously and unconsciously, subconsciously, and of course acknowledge that that is all going to affect your spirituality and your spiritual practices.
Thank you. Who else has a comment?
May I go?
Please, please.
So Ivy, beautiful, by the way. And Lorna, I think you kind of hit it at the beginning when you were saying that, you know, we all have to be aware of our own unconscious bias and our own prejudices. And, you know, seeing that also within being self-aware is a big, big part of doing the work as a medium and doing the work as because we're translators and we have to know what is our stuff and be able to get beyond that as much as possible, to be a kind of a clear vessel Or as as my neighbor down the road would say, clear water, rusty pipes. We do the very best that we can on behalf of the spirit world. Um, and I think that part of what we also have to look at and address is where our practices are coming from, because we still see an awful lot of, yes, not only assumptions and biases as we're talking to people, and that being played off, to Caitlin's point, as evidence, which is just not not good. But also, we look at various cultures in a monolithic way. We can look at cultural and spiritual appropriation, because of, some of our practices have certainly been taken from other traditions that didn't originate in this country. The trance work and the healing work and the even how many people will set their sacred space by smudging without knowing the background and where that came from within the various Native American cultures and groups. So I think that the more we educate ourselves, and then the more we educate others as we go along, um, the better off we're going to be as a community, a spiritual community, and kind of raising each other up. And hopefully, as that breaks down some of the biases, that will spread from beyond the spiritual aspect of our lives into all of the others.
Mhm. Any other responses?
I'd like to add also that white people, everything that Ivory said, you have to do that too, because even more, like 100 times that. The amount of conditioning and subconscious programming that we have towards racism is extreme, and that's part of what the self-development work is, and part of why, to this point of we can be racist one moment and anti-racist the next. That's normal, and we have this. There's this weight, this emotional charge that comes with being called racist, and not, we're part of our programming is to not ever want to be called racist, and we defend and feel attacked and feel triggered and kind of treat it as this trauma that happens to us, but we're responding to other people's trauma when that happens anyway. And so we need to do that self-development work and really be willing to look at ourselves and to start taking this emotional charge away from it, so that we can understand that if we are racist in one moment, that doesn't mean we're going to be racist in the next moment, and that we can actually learn from that and grow and heal and create a new way of being in our life. But we have to first be willing to look at it and be willing to dive in and do that work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin.
I agree with the emotional charge that comes with the term racism, and I believe that again, acknowledging that we are all operating under a racist system on a daily basis, acknowledging that, and if you're, I think that's the first step, because acknowledging that we're working under a racist system means, what part am I playing in it? What part am I playing in it today? And it also, it allows you to consciously think about your act, your words, whatever you're doing today, where is it coming from? I think it's very uncomfortable, and again, I think it's uncomfortable, because I think that racism, the word is accepted if it's something, like a cross burning, or a killing, or calling someone the N-word. But racism is uncomfortable if you're saying um, you're telling me that I'm not dressed properly or that my hair is not professional. That's racism. And or you're asking me, why am I in this neighborhood? That's racism. Those aren't harsh, but that's a part of the system that we live in. And I think that we need to start learning and conversating with other people to learn what racism is. I think that dialogue, like we're doing right now, diverse dialogue, because Black people talking to Black people about racism is not going to solve the problem. White people talking to white people about racism and their own views about racism is not going to solve the problem. If you don't know what you're doing, that's not right. How are you going to change it? How do you know? I think we have to have these uncomfortable conversations with a diverse group more often, and we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where we're going to find the answers. These are really uncomfortable conversations to have because it's such a charged issue. So
Well said, all.
Can I add to that,
Thank
Miss
you.
Lorna?
Oh, please,
Two
please.
things, two things that I think are really critical. I think that self-care for Black and Brown people when being in these spaces with white people is essential. I think you have to know, like, when you need a break, when it's okay to step back and not engage. You know, every day that we wake up, we're faced with so many traumas and so many reminders of the past, and that doesn't even begin to account for our existence in terms of how we relate to spirit. So I think that knowing your limits and knowing when you need to recharge and refuel and let spirit take over is crucial and critical to your preservation in this 3D world. And speaking of the 3D world, I think it would be incredibly remiss of me to not bring to light the notion of people saying, well, you know, police killing has nothing to do with what happened with slavery. And I think we have to really step back and look at what happened during slavery. There were blood bonds that are still affecting people today. Every time a police officer kills a Black or brown body with no real reasoning or rhyme, that's another blood bond in spirit that is formed. And if you think about all of the people who were murdered and raped and pillaged throughout those 400, 500 plus years of slavery, just on American soil, and we're not even talking about colonization in other parts of the world. I mean, we could, but I'm just going to keep it to America right now. Like, we have to understand the depths of that, the magic in that. And Miss Lorna, please let me know if I'm going too deep or too far. But there's magic in bodies. There's magic in spilling blood over something that you believe in, whether it be explicit or implicit racism. And we have to acknowledge the fact that that is still continuing on a daily basis to our children, to whoever, because age is just a number, really. It's especially egregious when we think about kids, but age is really just a number. And so every time someone dies as a result of racism, I'm not talking about just gun violence. We can talk about the history of healthcare in America. We could talk about the inequity of healthy food access, right? We could talk about the internalized racism as manifested through gang violence and Black on Black crime, which is also a misnomer in itself, but that's another discussion for another day. But every time someone's life is taken away from this realm and they transition into spirit under the guise of racism, that is another blood bond that spirit, racist spirit, gets to utilize to further their cause. And so I think as spiritualists and spiritual practitioners, we need to be mindful of the things that are still happening in 2021 are not much different than what happened in 1650 or 1522. It's still going on, and everything that we do or say, or everything we don't do or say, because activity and inactivity all can contribute to the continuance of racism. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ivory. And just feel free to bust in if I'm moving along too quickly. Uh, I've developed thick skin over the years,
Well,
um,
and
especially being a spiritual practitioner. Yes, go ahead, Caitlin.
I just wanted to add to Ivory's point that this speaks really to generational trauma as well, and this connection. You know, we all carry the trauma of our ancestors and of the society that we live in and the culture that we live in, and all of it. It's, you know, it's in us. It's I think someone in the chat said cellular memory. And it's our responsibility. You know, we might not have done those things then, but it's our responsibility now to heal them where we are here. And when we're able to heal where we are, it has this ripple effect that goes out into the future, into other people, you know, everything. And so it's our responsibility at this point. If we are, once we're aware of it, we get to heal that and do better.
I,
Going to take a pregnant pause, just in case. Now, I do want to also bring it home, if you don't mind, because I think that oftentimes what happens in our spiritual community, we hear what's known as, I believe, gaslighting, where you hear things such as, oh, that's a political subject, and that has nothing to do with me. But I think a stark reality in our spiritual community is the fact that, number one, as I mentioned, the history of spiritualism and mediumship is absolutely derelict in focusing on the contributions and the identity of many people of color who were wonderful, wonderful mediums and also excellent spiritualists. But then on the current scene, I've been attending classes and workshops and development groups since on or about 2010, 2011 to present. And I would say 90% of the times that I was participating, I was the only person of color in the group, which has its own, shall I say, peculiar experience for a person of color. So I think that there's a tendency, because many of the facets of spiritualism, and you know, we know brotherhood and motherhood of man is the second principle. And if you walk up to any spiritualist and you say, "Are you racist?" they would probably uh, fall down and die, because that's the second principle in spiritualism. But more than that, in both in mediumship and other spiritual practices, the idea of being open to all members of the human family is something that is prized. Again, if you talk to any person. So how is it you understand that even to the present time, there are few people of color in some of the major institutions in spiritualism and mediumship and trauma? If you visit Arthur Findlay College today, there is not one medium of color whose picture is on the corridor as you go in. Is that because there's a subtle message there somewhere that mediums of color or people that are practicing or that happen to be people of color are not good enough or valued enough to be able to teach in a major place, where one would say, from an indigenous point of view, the indigenous people actually invented or initiated mediumship and spiritual work. And it was something that was the Fox sisters experienced. And then all of a sudden, and I'm gonna get in trouble with this, but all of a sudden, a lot of white people owned it. So go figure. So how do you understand that fact? The fact that there are little or very few people of color in some of the major institutions in mediumship and spiritualism, and what are ways in which you think that this is something that needs to be worked on as we focus on being anti-racist spiritual practitioners?
I'll say this. Sometimes I wonder if spirits of the ancestors of Black and Brown people have intentionally kept us out of those spaces because it doesn't align with their practices ancestrally. And so I don't always try to take things for face value. I try to be very critical in my approach and have different perspectives that I look at things. So, and I say that too in application to my own life when I'm not invited into certain spaces or welcome into certain spaces or where I don't have a seat at the table. I intuitively feel that my spirit ancestors don't want me there. And so, is it really a question of like, should we be there? Or are we supposed to continue the work that they did in that way and honor them through their ancestral practices rather than trying to assimilate? And I know that sounds radical because we want to all have a place where we can come and be together. But when you really think about who our ancestors were through the literature they left behind, through the memories that we have of them, through the history that we have of them, is it appropriate? Is it honoring of them to try to be in those spaces where we haven't been explicitly invited or integrated? And so that's just one perspective.
Other comments?
I I want to comment, and I also, it's so interesting because we have a spiritual tradition of not recruiting, right? As spiritualists, we don't do missionary, which missionaries are such a colonialist idea, regardless. So, but we do have to split the difference um, in making people who are interested feel welcome, no, regardless of who they are. Um, and I think I'm hoping I'm not talking in circles, so I apologize if I am, because my mind's going in five directions all at once. Not abnormal for me, by the way. But I'm thinking about how we have looking at spiritualism versus spiritism, and how spiritism, which is a lot more prevalent, of course, coming out of France, but integrated very much with with the slave trade that took place, and going into South America, how it has taken a lot of the ideas from um, people of African ancestry, and how that integrated also with the indigenous folks of the islands in the Caribbean, um, and of course in South America, and how that mixed with Catholicism and the colonial Christian ideas, and how we sort of have some connection with that in North America, although we don't often recognize where those traditions came from. But something with with the trance work, um, I I often associate trance work more with the roots of spiritism than I do off of the mesmerism or the hypnotism that was so prevalent in early spiritualism. It set the foundation for the trance work of early spiritualism in the U.S. So, you know, to Ivy's point, I that's not a perspective I would have thought of before. Because we do set the intention that we want to be honoring of the ancestors and the spirit people and whoever we connect with, and want it, but how? So that's very interesting, and wanting to recognize different traditions to give credit, and also be very honoring of the people in the here and now, and how we can work on ourselves in order to be inviting to anybody who might be interested in developing their spirituality through how we know to do the work. for lack of better, as we're growing. I don't know that I answered anything, but I think, but it certainly made me think.
I think you kind of touched on, Celeste, that we need to deconstruct, if you will, our own practices and where they come from. And so let me try to give an example of what I discussed a few minutes ago. So my fiance, he is Nigerian, so he's West African in his cultural and ancestral origins. And I just know from being in West Africa, you can't just walk up to the village elder and get all the secrets. And then once you are able to tap into the wealth of knowledge that he or she may possess, you know, there are steps and rituals and time that must happen before you can elevate your understanding, right? But then even more, you have to understand who they're held accountable to spiritually, their gods, their goddesses, their, how would you say, ways of life and their code of ethics is going to be completely different than someone who's coming from a Santeria approach, right? And so when you have, let's say you're someone of both ancestries. You have Santeria in your blood, you have West African, let's just say Nigerian, for example, in your blood. You have to deconstruct those two different pathologies, those two different ways of life, those two different modes in which you have to be held accountable to. You have to understand that your West African side may not coincide with the Santeria side. And if you do something and to honor your West African side and your West African deities and your West African principles, that might not translate well, or that might even result in disrespect of the same things that you have to be mindful of for the Santeria side. And I think what you have with America, where it's such a mixing pot, and you have young people and inexperienced people just pulling practices that they find enjoyable and trendy from all different walks of life, all different cultural backgrounds, all different gods and goddesses and belief systems and tracks of accountability. You're just throwing that into a pot of jumbo. That's not only unsafe for yourself and others, but also just unwise in terms of you have to be held accountable to whatever highest spirit is the architect of that belief, if you will, right? And that's not to say that there's not a crossing over, that one God is not the same God as another, but you just have to be mindful of, if you're offering offerings to West African gods and you're also offering offerings to Catholic, what is the terminology for it? Saints, right? Those two processes and those two thought patterns and those two, the acts and the steps that you have to take to honor those two different groups of people could work against whatever it is that you're trying to establish and do. And so I think we really need to deconstruct our own internalized practices. We need to really question why and how we do things. We need to be mindful of who we are accountable to at the end of the day, and honor that and respect that and be very clear on how it shows up in the work that we do.
Ivory, I think you're absolutely correct. And if you just allow me as the elder to just offer another perspective, in that I think what you're saying is absolutely true. And I think there's absolutely a place for people of color to figure out what is going to be the path of their spiritual practice and their spiritual journey. And yes, there can be a deconstruction and reconstruction of the face in that way. And I think I said in another forum that we had, is it possible it's time for us to begin to build our own institutions for studying mediumship and spiritualisms and so forth? But I think that's another discussion. But I do think there's a place for our discussion of anti-racism. And let me just again go back to Professor Kendi's point, in that we have to understand that not being racist is not anti-racism. What he is really putting forth is that there has to be a focus that we have. There has to be an assertiveness and an intention that we have to begin to break down the systems of racism that are evident in our country, including the systems of racism that we see in spiritualism, and also in the academic places and institutionalized places where mediumship and other spiritual practices are being taught. Because let's face it, people around the world, and we have such a wonderful group of people. And thank you. I think someone said they are from Scotland. We have people from the Netherlands. I see my beautiful sister Juliet Joan and Jeff. So glad to see you for joining us. And please, if you're oh, and here's my Lynn, darling, so good to see you. She's in Canada, I believe, but originally from South Africa. We have some West Coast folks. And my dear Brianna, I tell you, once you got it straight, sweetheart, you are here every week, and I'm so thankful for you. And if you're from other parts of the world, please let yourselves be known in the chat room. I believe Ursula is here from Germany. I tell you, it's just wonderful. But you see, if we don't begin to attack the systemic and institutional racism that are in those parts, I feel, as a person that grew up in that system, because remember, I'm one of the old school people that got to train with the people that we call upon as world renowned tutors. And I'm proud of that fact, but I'm not proud that for whatever reason, these world renowned tutors did not begin to examine the extent to which they needed back in 2011 to be anti-racist, that they needed to be assertive, they needed to be intentional in speaking out about the ways in which the current practices of mediumship, including the fact that there were very few students of color. Why? Why did they not feel welcome? What made it so that only certain people knew about this particular spiritual practice? What were the doors that were closed that didn't offer the opportunity for students of color to study with some of these people? And if I may say it with, shall I say, still respect, but how is it that on the current scene that we don't have more of our world-renowned mediums and also members of the spiritualist community speaking out against police violence and racism and seizing the opportunity, which hopefully we'll get a chance, I'm mindful of time, to begin to understand the concept of spiritual allyship. And that's a whole nother discussion that I'd like at some point to talk about. So I think, Ivory, you are absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Maybe we need to be in lots of different venues. And I look forward to people like yourself, the younger people, that we're going to leave this legacy for you to figure out how to carry on. We, of course, always run out of time, and you can blame me because I have a big mouth. But could I ask the panelists to just respond to the last question, the extent to which they have taken steps to imbue themselves with an anti-racist uh, 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 policy, procedure, journey in their spiritual practices? How have you seized the opportunity? How have you seen this to be an urgent part of your spiritual practice?
I can speak on that really quickly. I know for me personally, I've had to replace compassion with judgment when I encounter Black and Brown people who are really struggling with the impact of internalized racism, who are trying their best to navigate racist systems and they don't have the toolkits or the support systems to do that. And so I've had to really be conscious and mindful of replacing that judgment with compassion. And in the work that I do as an educator, I'm a teacher. Monday through Friday and plus. And so just acknowledging that the work that I do in my professional life can be a medium of healing and giving people the tools they need to address their own internal biases, and just spiritually healing myself. I don't think we talk about the healing work that needs to take place when you're a spiritual practitioner enough. So acknowledging my traumas, acknowledging my triggers, allowing that to inform the healing work that I have to do, but also as information for the work that I'm meant to do with spirit too. And so I don't want to talk anymore, but those are some ways in which I've employed that in my own practices.
I can speak to this as well. For me, I really focused, I use mindfulness a lot. I took the practice of mindfulness meditation and I apply it to all the different parts of my life, including my anti-racism work, and allowing myself to really be able to catch myself when I notice I'm thinking something or I'm doing something or I have a belief or a bias or whatever, anything that comes up or if something like triggers me, to be able to catch that and really work with that and use the tools that I've learned through this process and really be willing to dive in and do that hard work. And there are lots of tools for that. So
Lorna, personal healing, I think everyone is hitting on that, and working on my own traumas, and because I believe that it gives me the confidence, the compassion, and the confidence to actually bring this issue in regards to our spiritual work that we do. I'm new to the spiritual community, so it's been the past few years, and since I began, I noticed these things, and like you said, I'm the only Black person, and when you're dealing with the history, when you're learning the history, they don't talk about any Black people. Like, I know that we were there. Why are we not spoken about? And then what it feels like to be in a group and we're about universal healing, but not feeling like my life is seen in just groups of loving, light, healing circles of spiritual workers, but dealing with the everyday, like last summer, for instance, showing up in groups sometimes during that time, during last summer, it was very draining. It was very, that was a very painful time for people of color. And you show up in your mediumship groups and it's heavy and you're expected to deal with love and light, and no one acknowledges the pain that this whole country was going through. It's not just Black people that are hurting from racism, it's everyone. But having to put that aside because the group that I'm with doesn't acknowledge the pain that's going on, having to heal myself from that to a place where I'm saying, I need to speak about this. Perhaps they're not aware. Perhaps they don't know what they should be doing, or perhaps they don't know that maybe you should address these issues. And doing what we're doing right now, what you're allowing us to do is speak on it. But I had to deal with myself first so that I could come from a place of wanting to help and not speaking out of judgment and anger, because I think it really needs to be addressed. It's going to help all of us grow as spiritual workers. So I think that, again, I think Ivory said, and I agree also, Black people can't be racist. We're not racist, but we don't have the power to be. But helping to show what anti-racism what it looks like to be an ally, to be an anti-racist, I do believe that I can help my white friends understand what that might look like. But we need to be able to have these conversations. We need to be able to say, look, there should be more than myself in this group, don't you think? It's just look at it from my standpoint. And I believe I said at one time when I spoke with you before, Lorna, just think about with all the racial stuff going on right now, 9/11. I'm sure that when groups got together during that time, sure, we're practicing and we're bringing through loved ones and we're connecting. But on the onset, I'm sure that everyone collectively got together and said, wow, this is horrible, what's going on, we're all hurting. This is, they help to support each other, because that was something that brought us together as a country. 9/11, everyone came together, and this was something that happened to all of us. In regards to racism, as in last summer, I showed up in my sessions with all of my white friends, and I was hurting. It was a horrible time going on, but that wasn't seen. It wasn't, let's talk about this. Let's try to heal each other. Let's support each other. Let's be there, because that was considered something that wasn't our problem, wasn't our issue. It's there's so much. It's hard to get it all together, but yeah, I think that more conversations like this are absolutely necessary. We can't get it all in 2 hours worth of time.
You're absolutely right. And I'm mindful of time. If you all have to leave, I certainly understand it and I won't be offended. But I do think there needs to be an opportunity for questions of the panelists. And I think there's a need for opportunity perhaps of other examples in ways in which we can be an anti-racist spiritual practitioner. I think one of the key things is for us to take the blinders off. And though we are very comfortable and deeply ensconced in our own worldview and our own identity, it's important that we come to this work with a sense of empathy and a sense of understanding and a sense of expansiveness. I believe it was Sally that asked for specific examples of how it is we have felt people of color in some of our mediumship and spiritual practitioner classes. And it's so interesting. I heard from my good sister Latifu, who validated my own experience of a situation in which one of excellent mediums brought forth a white person. And when I raised my hand because I could take all of the information, I was told publicly, and I still am somewhat humiliated when I think about that experience. I was told from the platform, this can't be for you because it's a white person. And that comes from a place of not having, number one, empathy, and also not having respect for the intelligence of spirit. Because you are a vehicle as a medium. You are a facilitator. You are here to tell the story of the person in spirit. You're not here to engage in a narrative of bias or prejudice. So you see, you have to understand that one of the things that anti-racism teaches us is that it's along a continuum, and it can be in individual, group, and even community and national implications. So we have to begin individually. We have to take the blinders off, and we have to replace them with a sense of empathy, a sense of understanding, and an intention towards being anti-racist. So if we could, shall I say, let us go on at least another 10 minutes and open the floor for questions. If you have a question, I I don't think I need to remind the group. We are respectful. We are honoring the beauty and uh, love that exists with anyone here. So your question hopefully will be motivated by that fact, and also that there are more questions and answers that we're going to leave with. So if you have a question, please use your reaction button, raise your hand, and I'll be happy to call upon you, and you can address your question to the entire panel or to someone individually on the panel. So use your reaction button, put your hand up, and I will also scan the it looks like, Siobhan, do you have a question or you giving us a
Yes.
thumbs up?
No, really quick. I wanted to hear Celeste's answer to that question. I believe she's the last panelist that hadn't answered that question you had for
Thank
the
you.
panelists.
Will you repeat the question, Siobhan?
I wanted to hear Celeste's answer to the question you had for the panelists. I believe she was the only one we hadn't heard from.
And what was the question, darling?
How
Uh,
I
how,
incorporate anti-racism into my practice.
Thank you. Thank you, Siobhan.
Um, yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity. I have to say one of the biggest things that I've been really trying to work on, not only in educating myself over the last couple of years here, um, is holding is incorporating the talk of anti-racism into ethics, and in discussing ethics with fellow practitioners, discussing it with my students. And in fact, that was part of my development circle last night, was talking about ethics and some of these situations and how hurtful it can be to our colleagues, and our fellow practitioners, um, to be left out, and to not have, you know, not be heard. And it's never going to be a safe situation for someone, when we do not when we are not considering their feelings, and we're not actively trying to engage it, if not reaching out publicly, at least um, reaching out privately and making amends, when if there has been a situation in which you think that you have not been helpful or not gone far enough. And I can't say that that is enough, but it's something that I'm trying to be mindful of, in moving forward. So thank you for that opportunity to speak.
Other questions or comments? Please use your reaction button, and I will definitely look towards the different ways in which you might raise your hand.
We have two people right now. Sally and Brian both have their hands raised.
Thank you. So I don't know who was first, but I'm going to call on Sally because she made a comment before on the chat. And Brian, you'll have your turn, I promise.
Okay. My question is really quick, but it's something that I've noticed. I feel like white people, as white people, we are more likely to take the floor and keep the floor. And sometimes I feel like it's almost like there's a crowding out effect. And I wonder how that feels for our Black panelists. Do you feel that? Do you feel crowded out?
I mean, I guess I can respond sometimes. Sometimes I'm honestly just too tired to care, like spiritually, mentally, emotionally, like whatever, y'all got it. But I think that there can be a lot of things said and unsaid, a lot of energies and vibes that are often in those spaces, yeah, where you can feel crowded out, or you can feel unvalued, or you can feel just like the token Black person who was called to be present, just to, look like it's diverse and considerate and inclusive when it's really not. So
Yeah, I agree with Ivy. it's I um I believe that we're so used to it. It's not, again, as I mentioned before, we live under the construct, a system of racism. That's the umbrella in which we live under. So from our standpoint, this is every day. It's in every situation. It's everywhere. So, I mean, it, the system was created so that white people have the power. So do we feel like white people take center stage all the time? Yeah, all the time in everything. And again, I agree with Ivy that when we are welcomed, it's a lot of times as a token to say, see, we're inclusive, we're not racist. There are 50 of us and we have 2 of you. I mean, there you go. It's just, we're used to that. And again, I feel like we have to understand that it's not individual, let's make this one situation look nice. We have to go all the way back and deconstruct where the issue, and it's a daunting task to all of us, I think. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes you're just like, I don't even want to deal with it because it is what it is. But you know, we have to deal with it, all of us, but we have to all come to the table and even acknowledge, as you just did, Sally, that that's the case. Because when we say it, we're just, you know, oh, you guys are just saying that, there you go, pulling that card again. We need white people to acknowledge it, because white people know it, but they just don't talk about it. They're now starting to, and that's what we need. So yes, we do feel like that, but that's the way it's always been.
Thank you both.
Yes. And if I could add to your question, Sally, and I think Melissa said it best. Hello, Melissa is in the UK and she's another valued member. And she said to really begin to understand that that racism is a system of hierarchy and also oppression. I think this is another aspect of the multidimensionality of racism. And what often happens in the classes, and what has happened to me on Facebook, beginning when I talked about Black Lives Matter, is that many of the people that identified themselves as spiritual people and spiritual practitioners kind of came at me most violently against my views, as if, now just listen to the meta communication that goes on here, as if they had the capacity to, based upon their whiteness and perceived, let me underline the perceived part, their perceived privilege status as spiritual practitioners, to be able to define what is relevant and what is not relevant in mediumship and spiritual practice. So you see the face of that, the way they responded to me most violently. I had to report some of their reactions to the Facebook people, because they were very, very nasty, using profanity. But you begin to see how this idea of racism in spiritual practice has a very profound face. And you begin to see it express itself when you begin to bring up issues of difference in spiritual practice. You either hear, oh, you're talking political and politics does not belong here. Or you hear, oh, we're all human. We all bleed the same. I don't believe in difference. Well, if you don't believe in difference, what do you believe about me and my experience? So you see, there's a horrific gaslighting that goes on, a lack of validating our experience, which has the capacity, I think, to what Ra's comment made. It has the capacity to insidious soul murder of people of color, because it's a constant cycle of oppression and a constant cycle of placing us in what Isabel Wilkinson talks about, in this caste system that exists here, not only in the United States, but other places as well. So we have to begin to understand, if we're going to really seriously own this anti-racist perspective, that it is a assertive intention that we must take on towards affecting change, whether it is protesting, whether it's supporting or promoting uh, 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 spiritual people of color and their education. You know, I'd love to see scholarships for some of my wonderful people of color that don't necessarily have the money. It may sound like it's a small amount for $25 or 25 pounds or 25 euros, but some of us don't have it. I would love to see scholarships for students, people of color that are interested, or promoting other businesses of people of color. You know, there are many teachers such as myself out here, but we don't necessarily get the promotion of our skills, again, because of this superimposed horrific hierarchy that exists, that in some way there's a rather insidious message. Well, maybe she's not as quite as good as so-and-so. So we have to raise awareness of white people. Maybe some whites will take away from this discussion we had today of organizing groups, book clubs, discussion groups, where some of this stuff is going on. It's essential that we speak up in situations where injustice is happening. How many times have we stood quiet? When I was in the class where the gentleman says, oh, you can't take this person because this person is white, there was not one white fellow student that said anything about it. The teacher was incensed. I won't say who it was, but it's one of my favorite persons. The teacher was incensed and talked about it over and over, about the ways in which we denigrate our mediumship by not being a truthful and ethical interpreter of the spirit's experience. So it's important that we speak up. It's important that whatever is happening to a person with regard to justice, that we have to talk about it. And we have to keep in mind, this is a very expansive, multi-dimensional concept, a concept that has mind, body, and spirit implications. And that if we indeed see ourselves as spiritual practitioners, this idea of allyship, this idea of anti-racism, this idea of assertively, in a very concerted way, attacking racism is essential to our own development and our own allyship with spirit. Brian.
Thank you all. That was great. Can I just say one thing in response to you, Lorna?
Oh, sure.
That from a white person's perspective, I think part of what happens, what turns into oppression, is from a white person's perspective, we're trying to maintain control, which we self-justify this concept of control, but it's actually oppression. So I just want to throw that in there. Thank you.
I feel it. Thank you. All right, Brian, you've been patient.
So I'll make mine really quick. One of the things I'm really grateful about with this dialogue is, and I'm not comparing being gay to being a person of color. I'm really clear that I have a lot more privilege, and I still have my privilege as a white person, and I can really control the way the world has to deal with my gayness. I can kind of control it. Like when we're at Home Depot and I'm with my husband, I can kind of control it. But I wanted to ask some guidance on this. When people have hurt me around my gayness, around that part of my identity, because it goes really deep. And so I'm certain for people of color, the hurt we experience, even if it's just coming from a place of not knowing or come from a place of just being unaware, that hurt can go so deep. It changes my vulnerability sometimes with certain people, and I'll actually kind of stop interacting with people. I'll become polite but very distant with people when this kind of stuff happens with me. So I'm just curious, how do people deal with that? How do you deal with that hurt? How do you
Mute
quiet that hurt?
yourselves, please. Sorry, Brian. Oh, okay. That must be in your house.
No, it's just, I'm just curious, how do we quiet that hurt? How do we move past that hurt so we can restore connection with those people so that we don't, because even if conflicts come up, people often will ignore the gayness piece. They'll completely just like put that aside because it doesn't serve their anger. So I'm just curious, how do people, I'm just curious from the panelists, really, how do you move past the hurt to want to re-engage again? Because for me, frankly, I just get really polite and distant, and because that hurt goes so deep, and I'm aware that people can't really understand the depth of that hurt. But like even with the kneeling piece, with NFL and what have you, I kept seeing these courageous athletes kneeling, begging for people to acknowledge the hurt. And of course, we as white people made it about dishonoring the flag, which is nonsense. So I feel like the hurt never gets to speak. I feel like it's always in the mind. We're having conversations about this from the mind. But I want to know, how do we let the hurt speak? How do we create spaces for that to actually come through and be acknowledged? And then find each other again, find a way to reconnect with people that have hurt us in that way, in a different way. I understand as a white person, and I've caused that hurt, by the way. Let's be really clear, I call myself a racist because of that. So I'm reminding myself by saying that I have a responsibility to be awake to my bias. And so I do that on purpose. But I'm curious how we let that hurt speak, and how you move past that to find a reason to connect with people again. Because I have a difficult time with that. People that have hurt me in that way, as I said, I just typically just don't want to ever reconnect with them again. And I don't think that's helpful necessarily. So I'd love to hear some guidance about how you move past the hurt, or how you make sure the hurt speaks and is acknowledged. So anyway, thanks.
I think, Brian, you're touching on the issue of accessibility to therapy, accessibility to healthy foods, to healthy living environments. People need the space and the capacity and the tools to heal themselves. And again, that's an arduous journey for whoever you are, of whatever background and ancestral inheritance that you have. But acknowledging that racism creates intentional barriers to those things that are required for healing is another part of the issue. I just dropped in the chat that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The issue of racism is rooted in the work that white people must do. You know, Black and brown people cannot assemble something they did not create. And so white people have to dismantle racism, and Black people need to do the healing work to, no matter what, like our healing cannot be dependent upon the end of racism. Our healing has to move forward no matter what, but understanding that, Brian, there are going to be barriers to Black people healing themselves and brown people healing themselves. And that can be as wide ranging as educational inequity or inaccessibility to healthcare, whether that be therapy, whether it be for physical ailments, access to healthy food, or whether that be, just Black women not feeling beautiful because their image is not presented in mainstream media, which again can be harmful to the self and to the spirit. So acknowledging those barriers that are in place, and hey, if you want to adopt a Black or brown person and pay for their therapy, go for it. You know, if you want to connect them to a mentor who will guide them through their therapy and their healing process, go for it. If you want to contribute to organizations that can mobilize and get Black and brown people the skills and the tools that they need to complete that healing work, no matter what happens with racism, I think that's what you can do as a white ally. But the barriers are systematic and institutional and intentional in keeping Black and brown people from having that healing that will result in an internal happiness and in a spiritual satisfaction that has nothing to do with the external impact of racism and how that persists in the world.
Other comments from our panelists to Brian's question? Well, Brian, you know, I've got lots of responses, so you may want to hear from me, you may not. But Latifa is laughing because she knows me. Um, I do come from a very assertive family. Yeah, I mean, I wish you could have met some of you, the women in my family. Well, Latifu and many others have met my mother through spirit, and she probably would say I don't talk enough because she would have taken over this whole thing, and she would have had relevant things to say. But I do want to tell you that my own self-care is absolutely paramount, because what happens with me is I go through a cycle of anger, powerlessness, and then sadness. And the cycle does take an emotional toll on me. And what I have done, of course, I've had years of therapy, and before it ended with managed care, I was even on the couch for many years and in groups. But I do think that if you don't, if as a person of color, don't put self-care at the front of the needs that you have for this type of situation, it can really make you vacillate between, uh, I feel, of sadness and despair and just unbelievable rage, where you have thoughts of, well, I won't say what thoughts because we have some clinicians in the audience and I don't want them to hospitalize me as a possible danger. But I'm being very honest with you because you asked the question, and I just want to let you know that it's not easy to be in our shoes. You know, this past week where there was murder after murder after murder, and even, you know, people were cheering for the Chauvin case. Well, you know, I was sad. I was sad that the level of incontrovertible truth had to be expressed before the justice could be served. How many situations are there that there wasn't that type of incontrovertible truth evidence, you know, and the people were set free, as I said, Emmett Till, and in my own case, my great grandfather was sought after by the police. We think because of his marriage to a white woman, and also in Money, Mississippi. Isn't that synchronicity? So what I would say is, it can be hard to be in my shoes, and I think that it's essential to be to understand the the experience of people of color that come into your midst, whether it's in the class and they're the only Black person, and everybody makes their plans for lunch and they don't think about maybe including that Black person, you know, so that Black person is left in the empty room trying to figure out what they're going to do for lunch. You see, that's because there's blinders there. There's blinders there in one's own identity, in one's own worldview. So I hope that that gives you some sense of at least my experience and Ivory's experience. Okay, so Brianna, I think is next, and I am mindful of time. We will have a hard stop at 2:15, but do know that we're going to continue these dialogues, and we hope you will come back for another session, because I think we need to talk and we need to figure out some ways in which we can add anti-racism to our repertoire of spiritual practice skills. So Miss Brianna, my darling, please give your question. Unmute yourself.
Okay, I kind of have a statement and then a question. So I just want to tap basis on the first spiritual church I joined, everyone was white. There was one Black person there and I joined it. And I did experience, everyone was welcoming and very nice, but I did experience, oh, we're all going over here. We're gonna have a session on Friday night and they're like, are you coming? Or I wasn't invited. And that would happen so many times that I actually left that church and joined another church, spiritual church, because it was more eclectic. And they were very welcoming there. But I also experienced some things there as well that I was able to work through, so I can understand being the only Black person in the group, where I feel like even in the spiritualist group, if you're white and you're not racist, I feel like if you're in a group or you're somewhere and you hear people speaking or saying racist things or doing things that are racist and you don't speak up and you don't say anything and you stay silent, that's part of the problem. I feel like part of it should be, I guess that's my question, like, what are you doing when you're in that type of environment and someone says something, and instead of speaking and saying, hey, that's wrong, you know, it's easier, because I myself have been in school, and it's easier just not to say anything than to speak up. And I think that's part of the issue. So I don't know how to formulate that into a question, but how do you navigate through those type of things?
Roz, would you like to take that on?
I feel like what you're saying is, if you're not working against the current, you're going with the flow, so to speak, in regards to racism. And I think that's, for me, that's what we that gets to what we're talking about. Being non-racist is not the same as being anti-racist. And if you are not doing something to, even in a small way, on a daily basis, to deconstruct this system that we all live under, then you're actually working to continue the problem. Like you said, if you're seeing something, yeah, it's much more comfortable to just kind of turn your head and, you know, awkward, okay, not my problem. It's not that big of a deal, but that's happening everywhere, every day, to hundreds of thousands of people. If you look at it that way, that's a huge problem. And I think that it's not up to Black people to solve this problem, because Black people did not create this problem. And I mean, I think that's a very hard pill to swallow. We've been saying it for years. I mean, forever. We've known it forever. I feel like we're starting to see more white people stand up as allies. But you can't just be an ally when there's another police shooting, or when, you know, there's something big that happens that everyone wants to get on board, and, oh, this is so bad, but what were you doing last week? Or what did you do, you know, last month? What are you actively doing? Actively, again, and that's the word, is what are you actively doing to help in some way deconstruct the monster that was created? Racism was not created to be undone. So we've got it was a brilliant construct. It was brilliant. They came up with a brilliant construct and let it ride on autopilot. We've got a big job to do, but it has to start with the people who were a part of constructing it. We've tried it. It took 89 years for Black people after the Declaration of Independence. It took 89 years. There were 89 years between its inception and when Black people were even given the abilities to begin to speak out against it and to start fighting. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of privilege. That's a lot. And so 89 years, always, there was 89 years for it to build, and it just continued on its own. And to be able to deconstruct it takes all of us. I think the oneness has been put on Black people. Well, we didn't create this. We never would have done this to ourselves. That's ridiculous. We have to have allies, and we have to have people who are willing to stand up and say, let's invite Brianna to lunch. What do you think? I mean, how about if we don't exclude this person? How about if we try to get more people of color in our circles? How about if we try to educate ourselves on spiritualists of color in our history? Because without that, you don't have the full history. We don't have the full history of spiritualism being taught because it left out people who contributed on such a huge level. And it's continued that way. It's continued so that Lorna goes to Arthur Finley and she sees no pictures of Black spiritualists on the walls because that's the system that has the power. That's the way it is. And bringing it up is like, there you go again, causing those problems. The system says to shh and be quiet. That's also a part of the oppression, is to silence us whenever we speak on this uncomfortable issue. And I've gone off on a tangent, so I don't know if that is.
Thank you, Roz. No, you did fine. We'll take one more question from dear Latifu, and then if you can, please stay. We have one more piece of music we want to share with you that you might enjoy. So Latifu.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's just a comment regarding Brian's question of how do we handle this? And I think that we handle it in a variety of ways. One thing, some of the ways that I handle it is sometimes I'm not aware of something in the moment, and it happens that later on I go, wait a minute, what happened here? And I have to process it. And sometimes in the moment I'm thinking, no, they didn't do that. They didn't go there. And I have to respond to it anyway. Sometimes it's safer to keep your mouth shut than it is to open it. And the reason I say that is because it could be physically safer. It could be, what can we say? It can be, physically in terms of your body, physically in terms of why you are there, what you're trying to get. Because sometimes my mother has told me, keep your mouth shut, you're there to get the union card, and then you can do whatever you want to do. And sometimes speaking out prevents you from getting what you need to get, or from giving what you need to give. It's the biggest thing I find is the awareness, being in touch with our bodies, to know how our bodies are responding in different situations. Because my mind might not be aware, but my body's going to be aware. And then checking it out to find out what is going on, what's happening here. Is this a reality test? What part of this is true? What part of this is not true? Because sometimes when people tell us things we don't like, there's an aspect in it that we can change. And it might mean, advocating, it might mean writing, talking, whatever, but to find out what can I do, and then express it, get it out. If it's sitting in a spiritual practice, which I often have with someone I'm disagreeing with or someone I'm having a difficult time with, putting that person in front of me and dealing with their spirit, not their body, but their spirit. And often that spirit will get through to that person's body and the situation then changes. I think what we have to do is use every resource that we have, is talking to our friends, people who are like us and people who are different from us, to get their perspectives, to tell them where we are, and to look at how we can muster our resources. And for us as spiritual practitioners, our spiritual resources to move forward. What are the spiritual resources? Self-care is the greatest one. And through Lorna's grace, we do have some sessions on self-care. And it's interesting that we're talking about self-care and not many people come. But self-care externally, get that massage, do that sauna, walk in nature. But internally, setting those boundaries and keeping those boundaries, speaking your truth, writing your truth, doing these things, knowing that you are worthy, practicing self-compassion with all of these situations, because we're not just dealing with a legacy of slavery. We're not just dealing with that. We're going way back to having been captured. And we weren't captured by white people on the planet. We have to acknowledge that. We have to deal with the traumas that they experienced. Then we're coming here and there are traumas that we're experiencing. We're experiencing not only traumas as Black people, we're experiencing traumas from the Holocaust. We're experiencing traumas from the genocide that happened in Europe and that's happening in Asia. We're experiencing all of that. And how are we experiencing it? It's simply energy. And energy is coming down to all of us. So we have to be very diligent about our self-care, our care of our loved ones, and how we move forward in a different way to, as you say, deconstruct, change this that's happening, and go back and heal our ancestors and heal ourselves so that we are healing our children, so that we're not calling children out of their names, so that we're not telling them you can't do, but you can do. The world is open to you. And broadening our viewpoint of our worthiness of being caretakers of the earth, which means all people. And we as Black people have a very difficult job to do. But as I learned in Christianity, to him who is called, much is expected.
Amen.
And there are times when I say, are you sure you didn't give me somebody else's burden? Because I've been at this a long time. And it's like carving out our own special way of how we move forward in love, but also as healthy, whole human beings.
Well, on that note, Sister Latifu began with our opening prayer, and I think in many ways she closed with prayer, with some beautiful themes here that we can walk away with. So my thanks to each and every one of you, the participants that came from near and far. I was sorry I didn't hear from Jeff and Julianne Joan. I would love if you'd like us to stay a little bit later so that we can dismiss those that wish to dismiss. We can still have just a few minutes for further dialogue. But if you have to go, I understand. Those of you may say, this, you all are like the Baptists, where you go to church and it's all day, but you're not serving refreshments. So we'll have to work on that, figure out a way to serve refreshments. So again, my thanks, my gratitude to our wonderful panelists for sharing your thoughts, your reflections, your understanding, your ways in which that we can think about this whole idea of anti-racism. Celeste, Caitlin, Roz, Ivory, thank you, thank you. Absolutely, open your mics, give them a wonderful round of applause, and yay, they did a great job. And
Amazing, amazing.
Thank you, Lorna, for arranging all of this and bringing us together.
my pleasure. It's my pleasure and honor. And my spirit guide and spirit team, they bother me early in the morning, so I have learned to just go along with their suggestions, because otherwise they just giving it to me, giving it to me. And
Absolutely.
yes, so we will stay a few minutes after, but if you can, Caitlin, can you bring up that lift every voice and sing? I would love the group to be able to be dismissed listening to this once again by a different artist. Thank you again, and God bless you all.
We go to Arrowhead now for Lift Everything as it's played in the stadium. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was a country full of promise and hope for many. Black Americans faced a different reality, a nation separate and unequal. Yet their hope persisted. Pained by inequality, but inspired by resilience, writer and civil rights activist James Weldon Johnson put pen to paper. His words would become a unifying call, a hope for a brighter tomorrow, a timeless exhortation to lift every voice and sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing a rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Let us march on till victory is won. Let us march on to victory.
There are forces that want to take us back to another place. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward.
So we are ending the major point, major part of our program. But again, we can stay just a few more minutes if there's some burning questions or burning issues for those that are diehards, such as myself. Uh, so just free to open your mic and speak your piece.
Just saying thank you. Bye, guys.
Appreciate it.
I have a comment, if I may.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm really grateful for this panel discussion. This is beautiful. I thank you, Lorna, and for all of the panelists that participated. what I wrote this down because one of the things that I know as a spiritual worker and understanding the importance of recognizing um, us as people walking this earth is we need to recognize. One of the points is the recognition of our ancestors on both sides, because we are so, especially Black people in this country, there's such a complexity to how we are made up. And so for white people who, especially as healers, you have the ability to heal those ancestors that you know of, that participated in the oppression of Black people. And we as Black people who are healers, we have to go through the process of forgiveness of those ancestors who oppressed our people. And we have that ability because as understanding in the spiritualist church that forgiveness can happen on the other side. There's redemption that can happen on the other side as well. And this will help us, the recognition and understanding the participation of our ancestors can help us to move forward. We we have to see and look at the past and those that have uh, formed our views, because it, as someone has said, I mean, it's in the DNA, it's in the subconscious. And so we need to really face that and understand. I remember hearing my grandfather saying the N word. I remember how and the fact that as they reached the other side, you know they too, and I had to go through this as a medium and a psychic, is that I realized that, and was presented to me by the spirit, that my ancestors, those of European descent, those that had plantations in Louisiana and Arkansas, they were coming forth to me and they were saying, we want to be elevated. We want to be elevated from where we are. And so they are now making the point of giving to me. And I saw, as vision was shown to me, I saw my ancestors who were the slaves, those of Black, those of African ancestry on one side, as the white ancestors were busy giving to me, giving back to me, because they are wanting redemption for their participation, you see. And so we have to look at how far back it goes with our ancestors and recognize, you know. The other point too I wanted to bring out was, uh, people of color have always had a spiritual practice of connecting with the spirit world. We always have. The Native Americans, the Africans, whether you're practicing Ifa, whether you're practicing voodoo, we always had that connection. And there's just always been a prejudice from white people and colonists that these practices were idolatrous and of the devil. So we've been conditioned to believe that. So it's kind of like there's we have this issue. Now we can get into the whole thing of Christianity at another discussion and all that, but you know it affects how we are seen, how we operate as working in divination, working in mediumship and psychic abilities. And so that also is part of the racism, part of the prejudice against Black people. And it can steep into the spiritualist church, even though the spiritualist church, I understand spirit is spirit and we operate working with spirit, but it's, again, we're dealing with the deep, deep, deep issue and how it follows people for generations. And that was my comments.
Yes, that's an excellent comment, and I hope we see you more, especially in our divine messages from our ancestors, because that was in part my hope with some of the uh, shall we say, the journey of the
Yes.
spirit person in our. So we're going to continue with our divine messages from our ancestors, and I hope you will participate. It's really, I think, an opportunity for us to be transformed, both as spirit folks, because you know they figured it out on the spirit side and
Mm-hmm.
they want us to figure it out too. And this is why, in part, that I organized this group back in 2017, because I knew there must be a way that we could come together and figure it out as they have figured it out on the spirit side. And with respect to your second comment, you do know that after the break between the Black spiritualists and the white spiritualist church, that Black spiritualists formed their own spiritualist communities and began to infuse them with some of the, shall we say, the ethos of our African ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
However, when integration occurred, it was thought by some, I'm going to be careful of my words, some of the white spiritualist communities, that the Black spiritualist church that may have infused it with gospel music or some of the things that you talk about, that these were in some respect primitive ways of showing spiritualists or a connection to spirit. And I think it was coming from, as you duly noted, from a space of, shall we say, neo-colonialism, or
Mm-hmm.
shall we say, this oppressive caste kind of system that is part of the racist underpinnings.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of work to do, and our mediums of African ancestry, we also profile these different spiritualist practices. So we begin to understand the extent to which spiritism or the work that's done in South America. We had someone from Peru and also Brazil talk about the indigenous communities there. And you'll be surprised, their alignment with Africanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a beautiful thing to have that recognition, not just because Africa was is still the birthplace of humanity, but besides that, a lot of the spiritual practices that emanated from Africa are in these different places and continue on to this day. So,
Absolutely. If I may comment on what you're saying, Lorna, because you know, I practice Ifa. You know, I was ordained as a Christian minister, but what I do know about the, I guess the split off, as Ivory had mentioned, you have Santeria or Lukumi, which is practiced in Cuba, and then you have Candomblé, which is practiced in Brazil, and so these traditions definitely are African rooted, no doubt. Macumba, Umbanda, all these things that come from Brazil, but and Cuba and parts of the Caribbean and Trinidad, they keep the tradition of Shango. You know, so these things can are definitely African based, and some of them are incorporated with the indigenous people of that area as well, because the slaves that ran away in Brazil ended up in the mountains. And so they ended up actually with the natives there. So a lot of it is mixed in. Mhm.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And if you visit those countries, like, for example, Cuba, which I
Yes.
visited, the Africanisms have continued both in food, in song,
Hmm.
and in various aspects of the spiritual practices. In the mountains in Cuba, where many of the enslaved people hid,
Yes.
The white people couldn't manage the mountainous and the difficulty in the mountainous ranges. Their still ancestors are still there, and the beautiful aspects of their culture have continued.
Absolutely. I've been to Cuba twice. I've been to Brazil, and up in the mountains up there, because you have, there's actually different sects also of Cuba of the African religion, because you have Palo Santo, then you have Lukumi, and then you have those that have uh, uh, syncretized with Christianity. So you have that Santeria, where you have the saints that are related to the deities of the Orishas. You understand? And so, yeah, it exists. It is there. And even just in the Christian church, we have call and response. That's African.
That's right. That's right.
That's African when we're singing. That's call and response, you know.
You're preaching. So I hope you're going to be in touch, sis, because
Absolutely.
I will, I will be in touch because I think we need to be talking about some things.
I would love to. Thank you. Thank
You
you.
please keep in touch. I hope we're
Abs-
friends on Facebook or something. If not, please reach out to me, Lorna J. Hines.
Thank you. I just joined the group as
Beautiful.
of 2 days ago.
We're
Thank you.
happy to have you.
Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, no other comments, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Jeffrey, but you understand. I'm just interested. So much of what we said is relevant to your experience. I was thinking about your post about your grandmother in Suriname. We got to really have a expanded consciousness, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And it's very interesting because I never made a big issue out of it. But of course, I also noticed all the examples that were given today. Also, like when I went to Stansted, I was the only black guy and the only young person there in the group. And also the other way around, like you say, yeah, someone made a contact and tried to force a stereotype black lady on me, things like that. So yeah, it's very interesting. But I was curious about you. What did you do? Because you say you go to a cycle of frustration, sadness, feeling powerless. What did you say to the tutor, to the fellow students, when that happened to you?
I told them that in my lineage, it was a lot of white people. And so it's certainly possible that a white person could come through. In this case, it could have possibly been my great grandmother, and I named her, and I named where she was from because my daughter and I did research on her. And Miss Jeanne is gone, but I think the white ancestors also want us to recognize them because she has come through, this great grandmother of mine, in readings where she is telling me about her experience. Her experience, how she met my great grandfather, and, different aspects of her experience. And so she wants me to recognize her because you see, for years and years in the family, she was characterized as a Native American. It was a secret of her whiteness. But one of my smart children, who Miss Latifu knows who that is, she said, Mom, because we have the picture of our great grandmother, she said, Mom, how is it a Native American has green eyes? She said, this woman got green eyes. She's not a native person. So I said to my father, you know, who also has green eyes and is very light skinned, I said, Dad, what do you make of this? And he started doing family genealogy. And lo and behold, this woman, it was from the Isle of Man, traveled to Dublin, and then came to the United States, was a milkmaid, and probably came during the famine that was going on there looking for work, and somehow met this black dashing uh, great grandfather of mine. And the way they have come to me, they had a very passionate love affair, and she felt very secure with him. So That's how I answered it.
Mhm.
When he told me that it couldn't be for me. And you
Yeah.
know, the opposite thing happens, Jeffrey. You know this. They bring through a black person, they think it's for a black person, but it's really for a white person.
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
know this black person, and they don't even think that it could be for a white person. And in this instance, the person spoke up. I think it was either Kim or Dale. I won't say the last names because I'm outing them. And they said in the group, "Oh, that black man, he's for me. I know him. He was a friend of my father's, or I grew up with him. We used to call him Uncle somebody, or he used to have dinner at our house." And so if they didn't speak up, that spirit contact would have been lost.
Yeah, yeah. So thinking in stereotypes, and then yeah, with blinds on, like you said. Yeah.
And stay tuned. I have recruited Jeffrey to do some demonstrations for us in June. So I'm putting you on the spot, but you did say yes. So looking
Yeah.
forward to Jeffrey joining us in June, June the 12th, I think it is,
Yeah.
celebrate Father's Day. So thank you for coming, Jeff.
Thank you.
And I see Brian has his hand up too.
I'll make a quick, Lauren. I was just going to ask if you, we've talked about this for years, but I'm just asking about doing a class in kind of, when we became teachers, they gave us a cultural competence class. It wasn't terribly effective, to be honest, but it is what it is. But have you guys have you guys kind of worked to kind of think about creating a kind of a supervision or a class that would be extensive, that would kind of assist the white medium to be effective in the work? Because I'm getting guidance on not acknowledging race in the work, and I think that's that's dangerous to me, frankly. And it's also kind of a denial. It's that whitewashing thing. So it'd just be interesting to see if we could kind of develop a course that would kind of assist us in that aspect. Does it make sense?
Well, yes. And let me say this. We do allow our panelists to advertise, so to speak, their work. So I don't think I'm going against my own rule. You'll call me to it, Latifu and Caitlin, if I'm not following our rule. But the three of us have been asked to organize a 4-part series for Lilydale. And I think this will respond to some of your questions because it's a four-part series, and it has the opportunity to go on to be a regular development group around this issue for people, so that we can begin to have an ongoing way of beginning to see the extent to which our spiritual practice can be enhanced by enhancing our ability to be practitioners with cultural competence, cultural humility, and an expanded understanding of the worldview of people, and also the extent to which intersectionality, which we didn't even touch, but is so relevant, the extent to which intersectionality is present and an important part of people's experience. So that will be in June. I think June 1st starts the first one. It's with 4 successive Tuesdays. And we are looking forward, if I could speak to my other team members, we're looking forward to this as an opportunity to craft a important way of addressing this issue in the practice of mediumship and other spiritual practices. But above and beyond that, because there's lots of different ways to go on this, I think other ways of addressing this sore lack among mediums. We all work hard. We'll work hard to get the how are we gonna get the names and the address where they lived and blah blah. We do all this stuff for technique, but we don't do a lot for our own personal development. So the team and I really felt that there was an important part of the mediums training has to be uh, this ways in which the isms, I think that's what we're calling it, the isms that dim our light. So you're welcome to join us, anyone in Lilydale. It's on the Lilydale website. And where's Caitlin? Caitlin, will we put something up on our individual websites on the Lilydale initiative?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're friends. So you're welcome to look at our timeline, any of the three of us, to obtain information. And I hope you'll spread the word and encourage your students. Those of you know Brian is an excellent teacher and a writer and all sorts of good things, and encourage your students to participate. Okay, so shall we say this is the last question? For real? Aja, hello.
Hi. Whoop. Oh, good. You can hear me. Thank you so much. It's been really enlightening for me to attend this and to hear everyone's honesty. I'm in an unusual position in my racial group because I am Eurasian, and so my experience here in the United States was, I could so relate to what Roz was saying about being the only person in the room, because even though we were raised in the white world, we were raised in the white culture, but we were not of it. And so there was always that feeling of separation because we were the only ones. All my life, I grew up until I moved to California and did not see anyone that looked like me ever until I went to California. So it was a different perspective. And so I want to speak to, because I can feel, I'm an empathetic person, I can feel so much pain and suffering and trauma within people. And while I have experienced direct racism because of my blend, and because the war, things like that, and now we've had with the COVID, things of that nature, it brings up things. It made me realize something, because I did at a time when I was very young, when we were young, and my mother was a single mom. So another difference back in those days, single mothers were not common. And we were living in the projects because she had no money. And so we experienced racist behavior from other people around us. And I think that we as human beings might, for our own healing and for our own understanding, in order for us not to be consumed by the generational trauma, because I don't have that generational trauma. George Floyd taught me that. I experienced racism, but I do not have that generational trauma. And with what happened this summer, I had that realization. I thought I understood what racism felt like, but I didn't. I had no idea. But the experiences that I had that made me think I knew what racism was were more about learned behaviors. When children are cruel, they don't have intent of cruelty. They learn that from the people around us. Within some, there is the intent of cruelty and of hatred and of taking away the dignity of the person that they are encountering. In some, I feel sometimes it's just learned behavior and a lack of consciousness. And for our own emotional health, because when you speak of the feelings that you went through, I'll just speak to what you said directly, Lorna, when you speak of the feelings that you go through, to lift that burden from you, to learn for us all whatever color we are, wherever in the world we come, to learn to see with the eyes of discernment, to learn to distinguish between intent and learned behavior can help ease the burden of the pain. Maybe for me, when people, because I don't bear a pain by the things that people said, you know, bad things that they would say, hurtful things. And because I saw, even at that age, I didn't know I was a medium and a psychic, but I saw that they didn't have the intent of actual real harm, like the harm that was done to Emmett Till and the harm that was done to George Floyd, the intent behind it, the harm, that kind of harm. So maybe we can learn to separate it in such a way so that because I know for the white people, because I'm married to a white man who's a really good man, and he came out of the 60s and he's, you know, a musician and he doesn't have a bias, and it hurts him to be lumped in, you know, with other white people that are of evil intent. So it's going to need more discussion. I just want to put that thought on the floor for everyone to consider. I have no answers. I'm just putting it on the floor for everyone to think about. And perhaps as we practice our mindfulness, which is part of what we do, it's an essential part of what we do, because we have to separate ourselves from what spirit is channeling through us. Maybe we can get more healing and get to an actual constructive solution, because we always seem there's just a fence and a barrier that we end up running up against. So sometimes we're knocking down the walls, and sometimes we got a spoon and we're digging at the concrete and whittling away at it. And right now we're in a point where we're knocking down walls, but the more we include and the less we separate, then the more allies, the more of an ally that we are. Because I actually had that conversation and separated my husband, his generation, because it was the 60s, it was the Enlightenment generation, and that's the people here, that's their kids, the younger generation, the open mind, that's the thing. And so separating it from that, and I guess it's the wheat from the chaff. And I will leave you with that because I just felt moved to speak. But thank you for allowing me a moment. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome, Aja. And I do think the, shall we say, the biracial, bi-ethnic, tri-racial, tri-ethnic person, person of color is a subject on its own, because in many ways we people of that descent are forced to make decisions about where they're going to fit in a society that demarcates according to race and ethnicity. So I think that that's a wonderful subject to think about, as well as I think your second comment will be definitely subsumed under how to be an anti-racist part 2. Because I think the way I'm being told, there's going to be at least 5 parts to this discussion. And I don't know if Spirit is saying for this year or between this year and next year, or whatever the case may be. But I was just given the number 5. So I'm going to go with that. And I hope you'll participate. I hope you participate in planning, in attending, maybe be on your panel, or maybe lead it yourself. You know, this is an enormous task that we do, putting on these events on a weekly basis. As you can understand, the coordination, the annoying people as I do to please come and sending it out, it all takes tremendous time and effort. So we look forward to your participation, and everybody's here to make your the things that you're interested known, taking on responsibility, because I think that that's part of being an anti-racist. You may not have all of the ideas, you may not have all of the things written out, but you have the intention. So you can bond with Gian, or you can bond with Brian, and together you can come up with some programs, some forums, some places where this important work can carry on. So with that, I'm going to say good day to all of you. I just want to take a moment with Roz and Ivory and Caitlin, and I wish you all a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and excuse me, praying for continued blessings and the power of intention and fortitude and courage from our wondrous spirit to offer the cascading blessings to us, mind, body, and spirit, to continue to work to, for, and through spirit in all we are, in all we do, to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, and the nation from which we come. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Blessings to
everybody.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.